At a playdate with other parents and their young children, Aya's mother Sabah is excitedly relating the changes she has recently seen in her 6-month-old daughter. All of a sudden, she can sit on her own and she's trying so hard to crawl. She grabs anything within reach and says, "Ba ba ba," whenever she sees my face. I can't wait to see what she does next. Later in the day, after her afternoon nap, Aya explores a new toy by turning it over and over in her hands. When she drops it on the tray of her high chair, the toy lights up and begins to play music. Aya laughs in delight and spends the next few minutes excitedly trying to get the toy to turn on again. Aya also has a 2-year-old brother, Ben, who loves showing off his baby to friends and family. Sabah encourages him to help with Aya's care by bringing diapers when Aya needs to be changed and by including him when she reads stories to Aya as part of their bedtime routine. Sabah has noted that despite many similarities in the way Aya is developing and the way Ben developed at the same age, there are also differences. For example, Ben was already crawling at 6 months of age, but hadn't yet started to babble. Like many parents, Sabah wonders, what are the next motor milestones that Aya will reach? When might Aya say her first word? Is Aya showing typical exploratory skills for her age? Are the individual differences Sabah is observing between her 2 children typical? In this chapter, you'll consider these questions and others related to the expansive developments in physical growth and ability during this stage, including the way children learn through the use of sensory skills and memory, and the way language develops. Alexander weighed almost 10 pounds at birth. That put him in the top 5th percentile for weight, meaning he was bigger than 95% of newborn babies. Today at his 18-month checkup, his pediatrician comments that Alexander is now in the 50th percentile for his weight. Alexander's adoptive parents ask whether they should be concerned that he has dropped to a lower percentile, but the pediatrician explains that many factors influence growth during the first few years of life, including multiple genes and environmental experiences. By toddlerhood, all these factors together will move most children into a percentile that will likely stabilize in later childhood. The first 2 years of life are a time of incredible change. The earliest months can be a haze for many new parents and caregivers, who may be feeling sleep-deprived and struggling to learn what their baby needs or wants. But a few months later, a baby who used to wake hourly may sleep for longer stretches. Caregivers find joy in the baby's evolving smiles and coos. And 2 years later, that toddler may well tell grown-ups what they want or don't want by saying a few words or running toward a favorite toy or turning away from a disliked food. There are many typical changes in the first 2 years of life, starting with patterns of growth and maturation in weight, height, and head size. Additional considerations include sleep and feeding, important aspects of health and development at any age, and moving on to brain growth and health risks. Moreover, cultural, social, and other experiences may influence maturation in these areas. Patterns of growth and maturation. Growth in utero and the first 2 years of life follows 3 predictable patterns. Recall that in the cephalocaudal pattern, growth starts with the head and moves downward toward the torso and then the legs and toes. Figure 3.2. For example, the head and upper body will grow before the rest of the body. In the proximodistal pattern, development begins in the center of the body and moves outward. That is, before birth, the internal organs develop before the arms and legs. After birth, the infant's torso grows before the arms and legs, followed by the toes and fingers. In addition to growth, children will usually develop control over the center of their body first, and then gradually gain control over the parts of their body further from their middle, such as their hands and feet. This is why you typically see infants reaching for objects before they can successfully grasp and manipulate toys. The third pattern of growth is the mass-to-specific pattern, which begins with gross motor skills controlled by large muscle groups and moves to fine motor skills controlled by smaller muscle groups. During infancy, children make tremendous gains in gross motor skills, such as rolling over and sitting, before they focus on fine motor skills such as grasping objects and feeding themselves. Other dramatic physical changes occur after birth as well. For example, newborns may temporarily have an irregular cone-shaped head due to the birthing process, and/or downy hair, lanugo, on the shoulders and back that typically disappears in the first weeks or months. By around 11 weeks, newborns have gained enough weight to help them regulate their body temperature. Joseph et al., 2015. Teething occurs during the first year as well, with a first tooth typically emerging between 4 and 6 months, but sometimes after the first birthday. The bottom front teeth usually develop first, figure 3.3, followed by the top front teeth, and most children will have all their teeth by the time they're 2 or 3 years old. Among all these milestones, professionals usually monitor a few specific changes: weight, height, and head circumference. Weight, height, and head circumference. Average birth weight in the United States is about 7.5 pounds, and average length is 19.5 inches. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, CDC 2010. But average birth weight varies globally. For example, in Africa it is 6.9 pounds, 3,149 grams, followed by Central America, 2,874 grams or 6.33 pounds, and Asia, 2,713 grams or 5.98 pounds. Murate et al., 2020. In the United States, newborns weighing less than 5.5 pounds are considered low birth weight, which can be a risk factor for developmental problems. Rates of low birth weight also vary by region. Approximately 10% of U.S. babies are low or very low birth weight, less than 3 pounds 4 ounces. Osterman, 2024. The rate is lower in Africa, 3.9%, but higher in both Central America, 15.6%, and Asia, 20.2%. Murate et al., 2020. Many babies with low birth weight are able to catch up on their growth and weight gain over the first couple of years. Visaria et al., 2023. During their first week, newborns lose about 5 to 8% of their birth weight as they adjust to life outside the womb, but they typically regain it by the end of the second week. Graeber, 2023. From then on, they generally gain 4 to 8 ounces per week and can grow 1.5 to 2 inches in their first month. Graeber, 2023. Birth weight typically doubles by 5 months, and the average 12-month-old weighs 22 pounds. Graeber, 2023. After the first year, growth slows, and children gain about 5 pounds in the next year. Meanwhile, infants grow about 1 inch per month during the first year, and another 4 to 5 inches by age 2 years. Graeber, 2023, Figure 3.4. Monitoring head circumference is crucial for the early detection of cognitive problems during early childhood, and this measure is positively correlated with cognitive functioning in children and adults. Gale et al., 2006. In a child's first year, the skull grows about 0.4 inches, 1 centimeter, per month. At birth, the head is disproportionately large, about 1/4 of total body length. In adulthood, the head is approximately 1/8 of total body length. The proportion of the head to the body is part of the reason it's hard for a newborn, or even a 2-month-old, to raise their head. Growth is an indicator of healthy development. Physical growth is influenced by culture, environment, and genetics and their interaction, including epigenetic processes occurring both prenatally and after birth. Katana et al., 2021. Kumel and Skilton, 2022. Muglia et al., 2022. Nutrition in utero and in early life affects physical growth and individual health, and may be related to health issues such as allergies. Acevedo et al., 2021. Pediatric health providers typically measure the child's height and weight during routine wellness visits and enter them in a growth chart. Growth charts are percentile curves that track how the child is developing according to their age. The World Health Organization's WHO growth charts are internationally standardized, and separate versions exist for boys and girls. Figure 3.5. The CDC recommends the WHO growth charts be used for children ages 2 years and younger. CDC 2010. Growth charts measure height/length for age, weight for age, and height-to-weight ratio. By showing trends over time, they can help identify any growth problems. For example, if a child typically in the 40th percentile for weight drops to the 20th percentile in 1 year, the doctor will look for possible reasons. Growth charts are also used to identify failure to thrive, a condition in which growth is significantly below the norm for the child's age. The most common cause of failure to thrive is inadequate caloric intake, but other risk factors include medical conditions and environmental factors such as food insecurity or abuse or neglect. Goodwin et al., 2023. Failure to thrive can result in developmental delays if not resolved. Hussein et al., 2023. Irregular growth patterns could indicate health or nutrition problems and a need for intervention. However, a child's gestational age, birth weight, and parents' stature also influence growth patterns and account for individual differences, as do some cultural factors. For example, in Papua New Guinea, breastfeeding is universal and continues until children are 5 years of age. In addition, the typical diet is low in protein. This pattern of nutrition is believed to be the reason some individuals in this region tend to be smaller overall and to grow slowly. Jenkins et al., 1984. Sleep and variations. children's overall health is also influenced by their sleep. Sleep is a biopsychosocial process, meaning it is influenced by biological, psychological, and social factors. It is essential for infant brain development, immune support, and growth. Liu et al. 2023, and involve various sleep patterns, practices, and safety measures. Development of sleep patterns. At 2 years old, children will have spent about 33% more time asleep than awake. What happens while young children sleep? To study sleep, researchers use an electroencephalogram, EEG. These are images of brain oscillations or waves created by the electrical activity of neurons and captured by a cap fitted with electrodes. The recorded height and speed of the wave indicate the type of sleep occurring. There are 2 types of sleep. REM is rapid eye movement sleep, sometimes called active sleep because the eyes move while closed, and EEG waves in the sleep are similar to EEG waves in waking. REM sleep includes dreaming, memory consolidation, emotional processing, and brain development. NREM, or non-rapid eye movement sleep, is divided into 3 stages. Stage 1 is the lightest sleep, and Stage 3 the deepest. NREM sleep consists of deeper levels of relaxation, including slowed heart rate and respiration. A complete sleep cycle includes REM and NREM sleep and takes about 90 minutes for adults and children older than 5 years. Around 2 to 3 years of age, however, the sleep cycle is 60 minutes. REM sleep occurs more often and lasts longer for infants than for preschoolers, but preschoolers still get more REM sleep than adults. Approximately 50% of sleep is REM sleep up until the first year, and then NREM sleep increases until adulthood, when REM sleep governs about 20 to 25% of our sleep. We experience more variation in sleeping patterns during our first year than at any other point in our lives. Table 3.1. Compare these recommendations. A newborn should sleep 14 to 17 hours a day, and a 2-year-old should sleep 11 to 14 hours, whereas an adult should sleep between 7 and 9 hours. Maricu and Rodriguez, 2021. Newborns can't distinguish night from day and require multiple nighttime feedings, but they will start to sleep less during the day by 3 months. At around 6 months of age, infants typically begin waking less often at night. By 12 months of age, most infant sleep occurs at night, Berry, 2020, but night waking can continue through the first 2 years of life. Pavanen et al., 2020. Fragmented sleep can be considered a sleep problem, particularly in some Western cultures where night waking and bed sharing are less typical. Berry, 2021.1. As a result, many guidelines and recommendations about infant sleep in these cultures emphasize the need for solitary and continuous sleep. Infant sleep assistance. Infants offer cues that they are ready to sleep by crying, yawning, rubbing their eyes, or being fussy when overtired. But this doesn't always mean they get to sleep quickly or easily. In some Western societies, bedtime strategies include physical comforting, cuddling, movement, rocking, car rides, social comforting, songs, stories, and passive comforting, standing or sitting nearby. In rural Guatemala, as well as in many other areas, swaddling, tightly wrapping the infant in fabric during sleep for its calming effect, is a common practice. O et al. 2024. Figure 3.6. Mayan mothers typically hold their children but do not use stories or lullabies. Another strategy that has been shown to promote sleep in crying infants is brief, 5-minute, caring by caregivers, Omura et al. 2022. Some Anglo-European cultures, such as the United States and United Kingdom, tend to favor infant autonomy for getting to sleep. Gianot and Cortese, 2009. 2. Meaning the baby is encouraged to fall asleep on their own, perhaps with self-soothing mechanisms like a soft toy or a pacifier. Another option is sleep training, which is sometimes suggested for infants over 6 months of age. Reuter et al., 2020. One sleep training method is the Ferber, or cry it out method, in which parents leave the child alone for a set time to help develop the ability to fall asleep independently, even if the baby cries. Another sleep training option is a soothing bedtime routine, which creates positive associations with bedtime. Many activities in Table 3.2 can form part of a bedtime routine. A caregiver might give the baby a bath, read a story, turn down the lights, put on some quiet music while rocking the baby, and then place the baby in bed. A few strategies, such as rocking and feeding, can sometimes reduce the baby's ability to fall asleep independently, because babies may become reliant on these external cues from caregivers to sleep, and thus may not develop their own self-soothing strategies. Sleep researchers recommend putting the baby down when they are relaxed but before they fall asleep, and soothing them rather than picking them up again. Research has demonstrated the efficacy of behavioral interventions and sleep health education in treating sleep problems during infancy and early childhood. Liu et al., 2023. Behavioral interventions often focus on the parent's behavior, training them to allow the child to self-soothe, such as by waiting a few minutes before comforting a crying 6-month-old. These interventions are associated with improved night sleep for both the parent and infant, and reduce symptoms of maternal depression. Liu et al., 2023. Infant sleeping arrangements and safety. Infant sleeping arrangements, where the infant sleeps and with whom, can be a controversial topic and one deeply influenced by familial and cultural factors. Infants typically sleep separately from parents in the United States, United Kingdom, and Australia, though that can include sleeping in a crib or bassinet in the same room. However, even within these countries, variations can range from having a separate room for an infant to co-sleeping, in which the infant and caregivers share the same bed. Globally, co-sleeping is a common practice, Berry 2017, adopted by as many as 70% of families, Huang et al., 2010. In the United States, the rate of regular or occasional co-sleeping has risen to 50% over the past 2 decades, suggesting a possible cultural shift. Austin et al., 2017. No matter which sleep methods and arrangements caregivers choose, they need to consider the infant's safety. A sudden unexpected infant death, SUID, occurs when an infant under 1 year of age dies unexpectedly, often while asleep. Figure 3.7. SUID occurs through accidental suffocation, unknown causes, and sudden infant death syndrome, SIDS. Sidebotham et al., 2018. SIDS is deemed the cause when the death occurs during sleep, and evidence does not indicate a specific single cause. Some research studies associate SIDS with the body's failing to regulate physical functions, like processing oxygen and carbon dioxide. Kim and Pearson-Shaver, 2023. SIDS has been a leading cause of death in infancy in many countries for decades. Sidebotham et al., 2018. In 1994, Back to Sleep and similar campaigns were introduced in the United States, several European countries, and New Zealand to reduce infant deaths related to sleep. These efforts recommended back or side sleeping for newborn infants. For example, sleeping on their backs reduces infants' risk of choking or aspiration. Michigan.gov ND. Moon and Task Force on Sudden Infant Death Syndrome, 2011. Similar campaigns were introduced in other countries, and rates of SIDS decreased between 42 and 92%. Sidebotham et al., 2018. In the United States, the American Academy of Pediatrics, AAP, currently recommends the ABC method, which prioritizes the infant sleeping alone, A, on their back, B, and in a crib, C. Moon et al., 2024. Sleeping alone in a bed that is free of soft objects, toys, and blankets reduces infant suffocation risk. Infants should always be put to sleep on their backs to reduce choking risk. As they get older, they will learn to roll over and move around. Infants should sleep in a safety-approved crib or bed rather than slings, high chairs, or other furniture in order to remain flat, which further reduces risks of suffocation and choking. Use of these methods has reduced the incidence of sleep-related deaths. Shapiro-Mendoza et al., 2023. The AAP also recommends room sharing for the first 6 months to reduce the risk of SIDS. Moon et al., 2022. However, many parents find these recommendations challenging, particularly those related to co-sleeping. Moon et al., 2024. Co-sleeping has both risks and benefits. Some studies have associated it with an increased risk of SIDS, specifically when the primary caregiver has used substances such as cigarettes or alcohol. Baines and Mittal, 2023.3. Co-sleeping may also increase sleep problems in toddlers. Yang et al., 2022. However, the benefits can include more sleep for both the caregiver and baby, as well as easier breastfeeding at night and increased duration of breastfeeding. Psalmward, 2015. Sleep choices may vary based on each family's needs, lifestyle, and culture. For example, caregivers who breastfeed and do not drink heavily or smoke may find co-sleeping beneficial. Feeding and variations. Like sleep practices, infant feeding reveals different cultural practices and social preferences. Should infants be bottle-fed, breastfed, or both? Should they receive human milk, formula, or a combination? When should they get some solid foods? What types of solids should older infants have? Human milk and formula. Caregivers may choose to feed their infant human milk, infant formula, or a combination of the two during the first 6 months of life. Each of these nutrient sources may be delivered via bottle feeding, breastfeeding, or chest feeding, using a feeding tube attached to the nipple. Bartik et al., 2021. Human milk may come from the birth mother or be donated. Bartik et al., 2021. The WHO, the AAP, and UNICEF recommend starting breastfeeding within 1 hour of birth and breastfeeding exclusively for the first 6 months of life. Meek et al., 2020. Human milk is associated with a lowered risk of SIDS. Moon et al., 2022, and provides nutrients and antibodies that reduce infants' risk of respiratory tract infections, diabetes, colds and flu, and middle ear infections. Meek et al., 2020. It also protects against gastrointestinal infections, particularly critical in developing countries where the water often isn't safe for mixing with infant formula. In these countries, the risk of infant death from diarrhea and other infections is reduced when infants are exclusively breastfed. WHO, 2023. In some cases, however, such as when a mother has certain health conditions or is taking certain medications that get passed through human milk, breastfeeding may not be advised. In addition, some parents may be unable to breastfeed due to work and family arrangements, physical ability, or adoption. Some may choose not to breastfeed based on individual preferences or needs. Finally, sometimes supplementing with formula is recommended, such as when the baby is failing to gain weight well, or the nursing parent struggles to supply milk. Table 3.3 shows some of the benefits of human milk and formula feeding. Infant feeding practices also vary around the world. For example, breastfeeding rates tend to be lower in high-income countries, UNICEF and WHO 2018, which may reflect differences in the way it is viewed and how likely a mother is to return to work while her child is still of breastfeeding age. Gallegos et al., 2020. Many caregivers choose a combination of human milk and formula, as well as a combination of breastfeeding and bottle feeding. Frequency of feeding. As infants get older, the frequency of their feedings will change. The Dietary Guidelines for Americans and the AAP recommend that infants are only fed human milk and/or formula until 6 months of age. CDC 2023A. The stomach of a newborn infant is small and easily filled. As a result, they may eat as often as every 1 to 3 hours. Over the first several months, the time between feedings will increase, but feedings may still be needed every 2 to 4 hours. By 9 to 12 months, when the stomach has increased in size, infants are able to eat more at one time and often need only 3 feedings a day. A common recommendation is to follow the infant's hunger cues, sucking noises, open mouth, hands near mouth, and fullness cues. Turns head away, spits out, is distracted. Samarin King, 2005. Such responsive feeding can help develop an infant's sense of trust and security as they learn that their caregivers will provide what they need. Caregivers should feed infants slowly and patiently, encouraging but not forcing them. They can also maintain eye contact while talking to the infant throughout the feeding. WHO 2023. Complementary feeding. The WHO, AAP, and UNICEF also recommend introducing nutritious and safe solid foods at 6 months of age. However, the addition of solids is considered complementary feeding because the primary source of nutrition at this stage should still be human milk and/or formula. The time to start solid foods is based on the infant's ability to sit up, support their head, and push up with straight elbows from a lying down position. Figure 3.8. Babies will also show interest in food by leaning forward and opening their mouth. Introducing solid food before 6 months may interfere with the child getting enough nutrients from milk, though culture does play a role in determining when parents introduce solids. For example, many French mothers introduce solids at around 4 to 5 months. Courtois et al., 2021. At 6 months, infants can be introduced to cereals and pureed fruits and vegetables. To monitor possible allergic reactions to foods, safe foods should be introduced one at a time for several days each. Even at this age, it is important to ensure that an infant's diet contains a balance of macronutrients, with about 50 to 55% of daily calories coming from carbohydrates, about 20% from proteins, and about 20 to 25% from fats. Faison and Rouster, 2024. A healthy infant should eat about 1,000 calories per day, Patel and Rouster, 2023. The transition from liquid to solid foods is crucial for the development of oral motor skills and oral processing abilities, particularly during the first year of life. Nicholas et al., 2015. Infants are ready to progress to finger foods like infant puffs, small snacks that dissolve easily, and dissolvable crackers when they can sit independently, grasp and release food, and chew it, even without teeth. Kleinman and Greer, 2020. As the child develops more motor skills and socialization, they will be able to eat most of the same foods as the rest of the family and start drinking from a cup and using a spoon. Factors in food preferences. Eating behaviors can vary based on infants' sensory sensitivity, temperament, exposure to different foods, and caregivers' feeding practices. Infants prefer sweet solutions to water at birth. By 6 months of age, however, this continued preference was associated with dietary exposure to sweet foods. Forstall and Manella, 2017. Therefore, experts recommend offering complementary foods without added sugars and salt. This helps to set a lower threshold for sweet and salty tastes later in life. DeCosme et al., 2017. Infants are also born with a natural tendency to reject bitter foods, but recent research has shown that adding a small amount of sugar or salt increases the likelihood that infants will accept more novel, slightly bitter foods, such as kale. Johnson et al., 2021. Nursing mothers usually eat a variety of foods, which may explain why breastfed children tend to try new foods and become less picky eaters than formula-fed infants. DeCosme et al., 2017. Regardless of whether an infant is human milk or formula-fed, they will also have gained some experience with flavors through tasting the amniotic fluid in the womb. DeCosme et al., 2017. Food acceptance is closely related to sensory processing because foods differ in taste, smell, appearance, texture, and even sound. Blissett and Fogel, 2013. Exposure to a variety of foods during the complementary feeding period is related to greater acceptance of new foods. DeCosme et al., 2017. Children who are not exposed to a variety of foods may become unwilling to try new tastes. When new foods are introduced within a positive social environment and parents model healthful eating behaviors, children may be more willing to try foods. For example, if parents frequently eat quinoa and carrots, the infant may be more likely to eat quinoa and carrots due to modeling and exposure. It takes 6 to 15 exposures to a new food before we can identify a child's preferences and they begin to eat more of it. DeCosme et al., 2017. Thus, in order to set up lifelong healthy eating patterns, parents should frequently and patiently offer healthy food choices, brain growth and development. If you're having a bad day, do yourself a favor and search online for newborn giraffes. You'll be greeted with funny and adorable footage of baby giraffes awkwardly standing up and trying to take their first steps mere hours after birth. What takes less than a day for a giraffe takes a year for human children, however. Why is this? Many of our inborn motor skills are reflexes. A reflex is an involuntary movement that originates in our brainstem in response to stimulation. Reflexes are important for brain development, and most reflexes will develop into controlled motor skills, like grasping by 4 months and walking by 12 months. These motor and cognitive changes start with neurons, our body's messengers, and relevant aspects of brain development. Neural growth. The brain, a 3 mm neural tube the size of a grain of rice during the embryonic stage, is estimated to have 100 billion neurons at birth. 10 Donkelar et al., 2023. A neuron, figure 3.9, a specialized nerve cell, is the body's messenger and consists of 3 parts. Cell body, soma, manages the messaging, keeps neuron functioning. Axon, carries the message away from the cell body, contains terminal buttons at the end to help release the message, and is covered with a fatty white substance called myelin that helps transmit messages faster and more efficiently. Dendrite, receives the message and transmits it to the cell body. The development of new neurons, termed neurogenesis, begins prenatally. Once neurons have formed, they begin to form connections with existing neurons. Neurons are the only cells in the body that aren't directly connected to each other, but instead are separated by a gap or synapse. Figure 3.10. Thus, the process of neurons connecting is called synaptogenesis. Neurons release neurotransmitters, the chemical messengers of the nervous system, into the synapse from the axon terminal, where dendrites of the next neuron receive them. By age 2 years, children have approximately 15,000 synapses, or neural connections per neuron. Shonkoff and Phillips, 2000. These connections grow stronger if they're used frequently. If not, they die off in a process called synaptic pruning. Think of synaptic pruning as the brain's way of removing the clutter of unused synapses. As a result of overproduction of synapses during the first 2 years, toddlers may have twice as many synapses in their cerebrum/cerebral cortex as adults, so pruning continues into the teen years. Johnston, 2004. Beginning prenatally, myelination also occurs, the process by which the axon develops its myelin sheath. Myelination occurs primarily in the first 2 years of life, but is still present throughout the lifespan. By the age of 2 years, a child's brain structure typically has the appearance of an adult brain. Johnson, 2001. The cerebral cortex/cerebrum is composed of multiple layers of gray matter. The outer layer of the brain, made up of the cell bodies of the neurons, particularly in the cerebrum/cerebral cortex and the cerebellum. Gray matter also exists in the brainstem and the cord. The interior is white matter that is composed of many bundles of axons that connect neurons to different regions with functional circuits/pathways. The most rapid increase of white matter in the brain happens during the first 2 years, Johnson, 2001, as axons become increasingly myelinated. White matter is crucial for the efficient transmission of information throughout the brain and occurs along with cognitive and behavioral development. Stevens et al., 2020. Around age 8 months to 1 year, the white matter associated with the frontal, parietal, and occipital lobes becomes visible on magnetic resonance imaging. Stevens et al., 2020. Brain specialization. The cerebral cortex, also known as the cerebrum, is one of the areas of the brain that controls voluntary behavior and thought. Figure 3.11. It has 2 hemispheres connected by the corpus callosum, and each hemisphere has 4 specialized lobes. The frontal lobe controls thinking, planning, memory, and judgment. The parietal lobe focuses on processing sensory information, such as touch and spatial awareness. The temporal lobe is associated with hearing and language. The occipital lobe processes visual information. The lobes of the brain are further specialized. For example, the prefrontal cortex, in the front of the frontal lobe, helps regulate and control emotions as well as planning and judgment, and it continues to develop into early adulthood. The visual cortex, in the back of the occipital lobe, receives sensory input from the eyes and helps us perceive and integrate visual information. For example, this is where you might process color. The frontal lobe and parietal lobe also share responsibility for coordinating muscle movement and sensations such as touch, temperature, and pain via the motor and somatosensory cortices. Sensitive periods are times in brain development during which certain areas develop more quickly. During sensitive periods, the brain is particularly susceptible to environmental influences. For example, the visual cortex undergoes a growth spurt at age 2 to 4 months, and most of the visual areas of the brain are developed by 12 months. If an infant is born with cataracts, their ability to see detail is much better if the cataracts are removed shortly after birth, before the sensitive period, rather than later. Moore et al., 1999. The process in which different functions become localized to one of the brain's 2 hemispheres is called lateralization. Typically, the right side of the brain controls the left side of the body, and the other way around. So our right visual field of view is processed in the left hemisphere, and vice versa. Lateralization is influenced by both prenatal and afterbirth experiences, and governs handedness, language skill, and other traits. With maturation, we typically see language production and perception governed predominantly by the left hemisphere, with the right hemisphere's role decreasing during childhood. Olulade et al., 2020. Plasticity. The brain's ability to change, physically and chemically, in response to environmental input and to compensate for injury is known as plasticity. This remarkable ability comes from the growth of new neurons, as well as the growth and pruning of synapses. Because of the rapid synaptogenesis happening during infancy, the brain is remarkably flexible in response to environmental inputs. This plasticity explains why younger children can often learn the sounds of a new language more quickly than older children or adults. However, plasticity may also make the brain more vulnerable to negative events. DeMaster et al., 2019. For example, infants born preterm are more vulnerable to inflammation and reduced oxygen supplies. But at the same time, plasticity allows the brain to recover more quickly from damage. For example, children who have had brain surgery to resolve severe epileptic seizures need less healthcare intervention later. Pan et al., 2021. When we consider all these developments together, we recognize that important changes in the brain are the result of environmental experiences. However, at the same time, new capabilities due to brain development allow infants and toddlers to explore and experience their environment, creating a feedback loop between the brain and the environment. Health risks in infancy and toddlerhood. The occurrence of death before age 1 year, known as infant mortality, can be a marker for the overall health of a society. CDC 2024. In 2020, the U.S. infant mortality rate was 5.4 deaths per 1,000 births, compared to 1.5 in Slovenia, the nation with the world's lowest rate. Central Intelligence Agency, CIA, 2023. However, even within the United States, racial and socioeconomic disparities in infant mortality occur. For example, the rate ranges from as low as 2.3 per 1,000 live births for Chinese American infants to 8.5 for American Indian/Alaska Natives and 11.2 for Black infants. Singh and Yu, 2019. Infant mortality is also higher for those living in high poverty areas. Singh et al., 2017. These disparities are likely due to risks associated with economic and community inequalities, such as reduced access to high-quality health care. Singh and Yu, 2019. Globally, the leading causes of death in infants, toddlers, and young children are premature birth, respiratory infection, birth trauma, and malaria. Villavicencio et al., 2024. In lower-income countries with higher infant mortality rates, health risks for children aged 2 years and under include malaria, diarrheal diseases, and pneumonia. Ali and Aziz, 2021. WHO, 2022. Many causes of early childhood death can be prevented through vaccinations, adequate nutrition, and clean drinking water. Vaccine-preventable diseases. Infants and toddlers are at risk for several vaccine-preventable diseases during the first 2 years of life. Table 3.4. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, CDC, recommend the vaccines U.S. children should receive, when they should receive them, and the time between doses, if applicable. All these vaccines have been tested and are provided for the safety and healthy development of the infant. Following the recommended schedule protects against the risk of serious illness and complications. Malnutrition. Malnutrition, a lack of healthy nutrition, includes undernutrition, a condition in which calories and nutrients are missing, is responsible for 45% of all child deaths worldwide. WHO, 2022. Even without mortality, undernutrition is a serious health risk for infants and young children. Severe malnutrition reduces the number of neurons and synapses, dendrite growth and myelination. Georgiev, 2007. Prado and Dewey, 2014. Children in developing and war-torn countries are at risk for undernutrition. Starvation due to lack of calories and protein is marasmus, while kwashiorkor typically occurs after weaning in children whose diets have insufficient protein. Children then experience a loss of appetite and swelling of the abdomen as the body breaks down organs as a source of protein. Untreated, both marasmus and kwashiorkor can irreversibly delay physical and neurological development, leading to stunted growth, impaired cognition, and death. Alou et al., 2021. Bunker and Pandey, 2021. Diarrheal disease. Typically the result of an infection in the intestinal tract spread through contaminated food or water or poor hygiene, can also lead to malnutrition. It is the third leading cause of death in young children, WHO 2024, because it can quickly lead to severe dehydration when access to healthcare is limited. Public health prevention and intervention programs implemented during pregnancy and for children under age 2 years can reduce risks for malnutrition and diarrheal disease. Rueda Guevara et al., 2021. Finally, malnutrition can involve overnutrition that is the result of eating too many nutrients. This can lead to overweight or obesity, an increasing problem in middle and high-income countries that was exacerbated by increased food insecurity during the COVID-19 pandemic. Zemrani et al., 2021. It is associated with both short and long-term health consequences, including cardiovascular disease, diabetes, and metabolic and endocrine disorders. Calcaterra and Zuccotti, 2022. Matteo and Jonas brought their 8-month-old daughter Bella to her pediatrician. Bella has been sitting independently for a couple of months and tries to pull herself up to a standing position, but she shows no interest in crawling. The pediatrician says there is no reason for concern. There are many important milestones in physical development, she says, but crawling is not one of them. This is quite surprising news to both dads. In fact, some babies never crawl. They go straight from sitting to walking. Others scoot on their bottoms, commando crawl on their bellies, or adopt a crab crawl, placing their weight on one leg while bending the other to propel themselves forward. The pediatrician says that not crawling will not prevent Bella from reaching other important physical milestones, like standing and walking. The first 2 years of life bring dramatic gains in the development of movement and motor skills. A newborn's involuntary movements transform to the infant's ability to exert some limited control over their muscles. Suddenly, that infant is a 2-year-old child who loves running, jumping, and climbing. Newborn reflexes. Babies are born with several reflexes. Table 3.5. Some, like coughing, sneezing, and blinking, stay with us, while others, like rooting, disappear. Why do newborns have reflexes? Some, such as the sucking reflex for nursing or bottle feeding, are for survival. Others are a stress response connected to the sympathetic nervous system. For example, the Moro reflex, also called the startle reflex, is activated when the infant is startled by a sudden movement or noise. The head automatically moves back, and the arms and legs flail out. Other reflexes do not have clear functions but are appealing to see, like the Babinski and plantar reflexes. If you glide your finger on the inner sole of the infant's foot beneath their toes, the toes curl up, but if you stroke the outer sole, the toes spread out. Figure 3.12. Milestones in motor development. Motor development milestones in the first 2 years of life are rapid and dramatic, and parents and caregivers often eagerly anticipate their child's learning to sit, stand, and walk. Each achievement occurs during a given time span. The average age for walking is 12 months, for example, but infants can begin to walk as early as 8 months or as late as 17 to 18 months. These milestones follow the predictable sequence of cephalocaudal and proximodistal development. For example, following the cephalocaudal pattern, infants are first able to hold their heads up, then sit, pull up, and finally walk. In the proximodistal pattern, infants can grab an object with their full hand before they can manipulate it with individual fingers. Gross motor skills. Voluntary movements that rely on large muscle groups and typically activate the arms, legs, head, and torso are gross motor skills. Infants reach several major postural milestones in the first year. Table 3.6. Movement skills also typically build on one another. For example, after crawling, infants may pull themselves up and then gain the strength to walk. If a child is lagging on one or more milestones, the delay can be addressed through early intervention and monitored by a pediatrician. However, motor milestones also show cultural, experiential, and individual variability. Adolf and Hoch, 2019. Fine motor skills. Although gross motor skills typically appear first, infants and toddlers are also beginning to develop fine motor skills, coordinated movements performed by small muscles to manipulate and control objects, or perform precise tasks like reaching for and grasping an object. Table 3.7. Finger movements readily come to mind, but the toes, eyes, face, tongue, and lips also execute fine motor movements. Like gross motor skills, fine motor skills often develop in a predictable sequence. At about 4 months of age, the infant uses 2 hands to reach for an object, and then with more experience uses only 1 arm. Grasping begins with hands and palms, no thumb, a skill called the ulnar grasp. At about 6 months, the palmar grasp reflex is replaced by voluntary grasping. Infants begin to use their thumbs at around 9 months of age when they grasp with their forefinger and thumb, figure 3.13, dramatically improving the ability to control and manipulate objects. These coordinated actions are quite an accomplishment in only a few months' time. The development of fine motor skills improves with practice, as you can observe if you watch an infant pick up objects and put them into a container repeatedly. With practice, infants will change their grasping patterns to fit the shape and size of the objects. Barrett et al., 2008. Fine motor skills, much like gross motor skills, also show variability based on family environment, culture, and opportunities to practice various movements. Hosch et al., 2024. For example, being in a home with more access to toys that call upon fine motor skills predicts improved fine motor skills. Motor skills are also the result of interactions with other domains of development. For example, infants must plan and use their senses to move about in their environment. The ability to speak is also dependent on their being able to control the muscles in their mouth and larynx. In addition, although motor skills may appear to develop as individual skills, they build on each other, with each new one serving as the foundation for the next. As infants get older, individual motor skills combine into more complex skills, allowing infants to explore and learn about their surroundings. Motor development as a dynamic system. One theory that has helped developmental psychologists understand the complexities of motor development is dynamic systems theory, which posits that developmental behaviors and milestones are the result of interactions between systems, including those within the individual. According to the original theorist Esther Thielen, motor development is the result of interactions between internal developmental domains, e.g., cognition and the senses, maturation and the environment. Fujihira and Taga, 2023. Thielen and Smith, 2007. For example, to walk, a child must have several coordinated and developed internal systems, including balance, leg muscles, stepping movements, coordination, vision, and spatial awareness. Thielen and Ulrich, 1991. From a dynamic systems perspective, every motor skill results from multiple, maturational, and environmental processes. For example, growth in the cerebellum, which contributes to balance and coordination, myelination of the nervous system, and synaptic pruning are critical for acquiring both fine and gross motor skills. Morizawa et al., 2022, T. Meyer et al., 2010. Gross motor skills are also influenced by genetics. Identical twins who have nearly identical genetic makeup are more similar in the timing of their motor milestones than fraternal twins who share around half of the same genes. Uki, 2006. However, even identical twins have unique experiences that can result in very different motor skill capabilities, as developmental psychologist and neurobiologist Myrtle McGraw observed in case study experiments in the 1930s, McGraw 1935, Parnin 2022. Dynamic systems theory has since expanded into a dynamic systems approach, applying the theory to other domains of development over the lifespan, including cognition and language. Fogel, 2011, Spencer et al., 2011. You may notice that this approach incorporates many of the theories you learned about in Chapter 1, lifespan psychology and developmental theories, such as cognitive development and behavioral genetics, experience and motor development. While the dynamic systems approach improves our understanding of the influences of systems within the individual, ecological systems and sociocultural theories inform our view of the factors outside the individual that shape developmental outcomes. These can come from cultural and familial environments as well as from individual play behaviors and resources. Although the sequence of motor milestones is expected to be similar for all children, the timing and abilities can vary widely, demonstrating that environmental and cultural factors play an important role. Adolf and Hoch, 2019. For example, in Tajikistan, infants are regularly swaddled and placed in gafora cradles for long periods of time. Because of their temporary immobility, these infants reach motor milestones later. Karasik et al., 2018. In northern China, where infants lie on their backs with their body movement restricted by being buried in a bag of fine sand for most of the day for toileting practice, the onset of sitting, crawling, and walking is delayed by several months. May 1994. In other cultures, such as in the United States, Argentina, South Korea, and Italy, infants spend a lot of time sitting with postural support from furniture, United States and Argentina, or their mother's arms, South Korea and Italy. Karasik et al., 2015. In contrast, infants in Western Kenya have more practice with both supported and independent sitting, which may allow them to sit independently somewhat earlier than in cultures where infants are provided with a lot of support while sitting. Karasik et al., 2015. Crawling and walking also show great variability based on culture and parenting beliefs. In some cultures, infants skip crawling or walk before they crawl, based on factors like maternal handling, cultural beliefs, and whether parents encourage or discourage crawling. Adolf et al., 2018. Super, 1976. Parenting beliefs can also influence the way they handle their infants. In some cultures, caregivers perform exercises to encourage motor development that might be viewed as rough in another culture. Adolf et al., 2018. In another example, research following the Back to Sleep campaign has shown that infants placed on their backs while sleeping reach some motor milestones significantly later than infants who slept on their stomachs. Brower et al., 2006. Johnson, 2004. In response, pediatricians began encouraging parents to give their infants tummy time, which is associated with earlier development of gross motor skills such as walking, standing, and sitting. Hewitt et al., 2020. Play. Play uses motor skills and cognitive skills, both connected to brain development. For example, with time and practice, the infant who begins by grasping a spoon is soon able to use it as a tool for eating. Besides the physical ability required to do this, the child also uses cognitive skills to play. Using paintbrushes, crayons, balls, and blocks in play takes similar planning and coordination. By 1 year, the child can point to objects of interest, use more motor skills to explore environments, and interact more with others during playtime. At 18 months, the child may seek interaction, enjoy patty cake, and clap during play. Parents and caregivers can support motor development through play by providing age-appropriate toys and activities and encouraging exploration and movement in a safe, supportive environment. Table 3.8. Play starts in infancy and can inform several aspects of early development, including motor skills, social interaction, self-exploration, and exploration of the environment. Play also helps caregivers and healthcare providers observe how well development is progressing. At first, Amy is surprised that their 2-week-old daughter, Karina, turns her head when she hears Amy's voice. But as Amy thinks about this behavior, they realize that since hearing develops before birth, Karina has been listening to their voice for many months now. Amy mentions this observation to a friend who is an audiologist, who tells them that hearing is one of a newborn's most highly developed senses. The development of the senses is a crucial achievement in the first 2 years of life. Healthy infants are born with the ability to detect visual, auditory, tactile, gustatory, taste, and olfactory smell sensations. As they grow and develop, they become more adept at decoding these stimuli, a skill that helps them make sense of the world around them. Sensory development relies on both sensation, the detection of sensory stimuli, and perception, the interpretation of that sensory information. In this section, you'll explore sensory development in infants and toddlers. Vision. Although newborns can see, vision is the sense that is least developed at birth. The womb is a dark place, offering limited opportunity to use this sense. At birth, the anatomical visual structures are present but still very immature, resulting in blurry vision and uncoordinated eye movements. And an infant's vision is best at viewing close-up objects, such as a face or breast when being held. Newborns have low visual acuity, which is their ability to see precise detail. Figure 3.14. Over the first year of life, babies develop the same visual acuity of adults. Johnson, 2011. Kelman and Arterberry, 2006. Their contrast sensitivity, the ability to see differences in shades of light or outlines, is also quite weak at birth, but improves quickly. Johnson, 2011. Kelman and Arterberry, 2006. For example, an infant would perceive a black-white stripe contrast, but may not distinguish between 2 shades of gray. One common misconception is that newborns can see only black and white. However, at birth, infants do have some basic color vision, specifically for bright colors like blue, green, and red, with some research indicating infants often prefer blue. Skelton and Franklin, 2020. Color vision develops steadily during the first year of life due to the strengthening of cones, the cells in the retina of the eyes that are sensitive to color and detail. Around 4 to 6 months of age, infants can discriminate between colors almost as well as adults do. Clifford et al., 2009. Young infants also lack the eye motor control and neural development to track moving objects efficiently, which plays a role in their scanning of faces. While you might first look at someone's eyes to gather social cues and other information, a 1-month-old infant will focus on the outside of the face, the hairline and chin. But by 3 to 4 months of age, infants are looking at both the mouth and eyes when scanning faces. By 9 months, infants look at the eyes more than the mouth, showing development in vision and early social interaction cues. Wilcox et al., 2013. As the visual system develops over the first 2 to 3 months of life, infants begin to seek more detail and prefer images of faces over other geometric patterns. Ichikawa et al., 2013. Depth perception. Depth perception, the ability to tell whether objects are nearer or farther than other objects, is not present at birth. At about 2 months of age, as infants acquire binocular vision, or the ability of the eyes to work together, they begin to perceive depth. By 6 months, infants can distinguish depth perception in pictures too. Kavsek et al., 2012. The visual cliff developed by Eleanor J. Gibson and R.D. Walk, 1960, figure 3.15, made a major contribution to our understanding of depth perception. It consists of a table with a glass top that covers a checkered pattern. Half the pattern appears to be directly under the glass, while the other half appears to be several feet below it. Infants who were able to crawl were placed on the center of the table to see whether they'd crawl to the shallow side, and then to the deep side that appeared to have a steep drop-off. Few of the 6 to 14-month-old infants would cross, indicating that depth perception was present by 6 months of age. Infants with more locomotor experience, crawling and exploring, are more sensitive to visual depth cues. For example, those who have just begun walking will avoid the deep side of the cliff, even more than infants who are crawling. Adolf and Kretsch, 2012. Dahl et al., 2013. Since the original study, psychologists now note how many different internal systems are involved in this task. To make a choice to crawl across or not, infants need to have the binocular vision and eye muscle coordination to sense depth, sensation, the ability to perceive or understand that cliff, perception, and the motor experience and learning to make a choice based on the environment. Visual preferences. Infants have clear visual preferences. When given 2 visual stimuli to look at, they will often look longer at one than at the other. Even as newborns, infants show a preference for curved over straight lines, human faces and face shapes, and 3-dimensional objects over 2-dimensional ones. Johnson, 2011. They also prefer new images to familiar ones, faces to patterns, and patterns to solids. By 3 months of age, infants will look more at female than male faces when their primary caregiver is female, but they do not show this preference when their primary caregiver is male. Bae et al., 2015. Hearing. Infants develop a sense of hearing around the 5th month of prenatal development. Before birth, they have many opportunities to hear the biological mother's heartbeat, voice, and other internal sounds, so hearing is already an active sense at birth. Verifying an infant's hearing is an important first step in identifying hearing difficulties and providing the unique support all babies need to acquire language and communication skills, learn from the environment, and have early social interactions. Bauer et al., 2023. Some infants may need surgery to ensure the ear is functioning properly, while others can begin sign language or other interventions, such as cochlear implants, as early as possible. Research has shown that newborns prefer speech sounds over non-speech sounds. May et al., 2018. They also prefer to hear their native language, even though they can discriminate most sounds in other human languages. Yuschik et al., 1994. Kiselewski, 2016. We also know that infants prefer books the biological mother read aloud when 7 months pregnant to a story not previously heard. DeCasper and Spence, 1986. Although early research found that infants prefer their biological mother's voice over other voices when both were saying the same things, DeCasper and Pfeiffer, 1980. Recent research suggests that infants are responding to familiarity rather than to a particular person. Cragness et al., 2022. How do we know infants have these abilities? After all, they can't tell us their preferences. In one method, called the high-amplitude sucking technique, infants are given a special pacifier that sends information about their sucking intensity and frequency to a computer. Whenever the infants produce a strong, high-amplitude suck, they hear a sound. They quickly learn that sucking controls the sounds and will suck more strongly and more frequently to hear the sounds they like the most. DeCasper and Pfeiffer, 1980. During one early study using this technique, DeCasper and Spence, 1986, some mothers read The Cat in the Hat aloud during pregnancy, an average of 67 times for 3.5 hours of exposure overall, and others didn't. The infants who had heard the story in utero sucked more when hearing it after birth, indicating they preferred it, while those in the control group, who had no prior exposure, did not have a preference. Touch. Touch is the most highly developed sense at birth and makes a critical contribution to our physical, cognitive, and socio-emotional development. It is part of the somatosensory system and starts developing around week 8 of pregnancy, beginning with touch receptors, the neurons that respond to touch. By approximately week 30, the fetus can feel pain, pressure, and differences in temperature, hot versus cold. This means newborns are sensitive to pain during procedures like blood tests and surgeries. Garcia Rodriguez et al., 2021. Touch can also promote positive experiences with the world from birth. Newborns have sensitive skin and will respond to touch with reflexes like the rooting, sucking, and moro reflexes discussed earlier. Being touched helps infants build relationships with others when they are held and cared for. Carroza and Leong, 2021. In fact, skin-to-skin contact between parents and babies, sometimes called kangaroo care, is encouraged right after birth to begin the bonding process, and it has also been shown to have real health benefits for the newborn. Merpisha et al., 2022. Yildirim et al., 2023. Gentle touch also improves mood, sleep, growth, and health in premature infants. Fadla Mola et al., 2023. Wang et al., 2015. Finally, touch provides sensory experience with the world, supporting spatial awareness, body awareness, motor development, and learning. Della Longa et al., 2020. Seidel et al., 2023. Taste and smell. Taste and smell help us identify flavors and thus directly influence the foods we choose, and thereby our nutrition. Taste is the sensation of flavor: sweet, salty, bitter, sour, or savory, that we receive from receptors in the mouth and on the tongue. Smell is our perception of odors via the nose. It's a function of the olfactory system, nose and mouth. Both taste and smell begin developing prenatally. Infants prefer the familiar scents of their biological mothers. For example, 6-day-old infants turn more often toward a breast milk pad scented with their biological mother's milk than one scented by a donor. Luce et al., 2019, Porter et al., 1992. As early as 1 day after birth, infants are also soothed by the smell of their mother. Andre et al., 2020. Sullivan et al., 2011. As a first taste experience, the fetus starts swallowing amniotic fluid by around week 12 and can perceive distinct flavors based on the biological mother's diet. A newborn will show signs of recognizing those flavors. Manella, 2014. And many will exhibit a preference for flavors and scents to which they were exposed via amniotic fluid. Lipchak et al., 2011. For example, the newborns of biological mothers who consumed more garlicky food in pregnancy were more accepting of garlic odors, as indicated by mouthing and head orientation. Forstall, 2020-2024. Hepper, 1988. This finding held true for anise, carrot, mint, vanilla, blue cheese, fruits, and vegetables. Bacalar, 2012. Gabriel and Manella, 2023. Newborns enter the world able to distinguish between sweet, sour, bitter, and salty flavors, and within hours of being born, they show different facial expressions for different flavors. For bitter, they might wrinkle their nose or frown. For sweet or savory, they make rhythmic tongue protrusions, elevate the corners of the mouth, or smack their lips. Lipchak et al., 2011. Infants continue to acquire taste preferences through flavors in human milk or formula. The flavor of human milk changes based on the mother diet. Infants and young children who are fed human milk as infants are more accepting of new foods that were a part of their mother's diet. Dunn and Lesson, 2017. Formula-fed infants have also been shown to prefer the flavor of the formula they consume, but because there is no variation in the flavor, they are often less accepting of new foods at first than infants fed human milk. Forstall, 2017. Intermodal perception. If you eat an ice cream sundae, you simultaneously see the dripping hot fudge, feel the cold sensation of the first spoonful, and taste the sweetness of the chocolate flavor. An awareness of the world gained through multiple senses at the same time is known as intermodal perception. The integration of auditory and visual sensory information is one of the first intermodal pairings we make. For example, one study showed that 4-month-olds can connect the sound of a ball to the height of its bounce. Lukowitz, 1999. Infants as young as 2 months can connect phonetic information from the lips and from the voice. In other words, they can tell whether spoken words match the movement of the lips. Choi et al., 2021, Edgar et al., 2022. Motor skills can help facilitate infants' ability to integrate intermodal perception. For example, the ability to turn the head and reach for a toy allows the infant to see, touch, and process information about the toy at the same time. Similarly, parental lip smacking during mealtime also serves as an important signal for the infant about the process of eating and can encourage infants to start feeding. Wiggins and Kivallic, 2021. Thus, intermodal connections allow infants to link perceptual experiences and information in their environment, an important task in cognitive development. Streri and DeHavia, 2023. We have seen that newborns can use all their senses to gain information about their world. These sensory and perceptual abilities are still immature, but quickly develop over the first year of life to adult levels. Johnson and Hannon, 2015. Understanding the sensory abilities of infants, along with their perceptual preferences, allows us to interact with them in more effective ways and to use the appropriate stimuli to support their development. Dante is the fourth child in his family and is now 15 months old. As his grandfather begins to prepare dinner, he settles Dante on the floor where he can see him and gives him a wooden spoon, some teaspoons, and some pots and pans. Dante immediately begins to bang on the pans with the wooden spoon and then does the same with the teaspoons. He also takes the teaspoons and drops them into the smaller pot and then dumps them back out again. He repeats this process several times. Dante's grandpa may not love the noise, but he loves knowing that his grandson is actively learning. He understands that toddlers need to explore their world using their senses and their motor skills, and that even everyday objects can be entertaining for young children. In this section, you'll learn the main theories of cognitive development. First is Piaget's groundbreaking work, which continues to influence the fields of child development and education. Then you'll consider current methods used to study infant and toddler cognition, and an information processing model explaining the units and capacity of our attention and memory. Finally, you'll see how cultural and social experiences can influence our learning, and you'll account for individual differences in cognitive development. Stage theory of cognitive development. Jean Piaget, 1896 to 1980, was an influential cognitive psychologist who originally trained as a biologist and philosopher. He spent more than 5 decades studying cognitive development, and is most famous for his research and theory on the cognitive development of children. You'll consider some key principles of the first stage of his theory in this section, as well as critiques of his work. Background of Piaget's work. In Paris in the 1920s, Piaget noticed qualitative differences in the way children of different ages, including his own 3, responded to questions and explained the world. Lascarides and Hinitz, 2011. He then used his detailed notes and observations to create a stage theory of cognitive development, Table 1.2. Piaget's theory is an example of discontinuous development, which you may recall from 1.2. Themes of development is change that occurs in sudden shifts or as qualitative and dramatic changes in skills or behaviors. In other words, cognitive development happens in stages, in the same way a caterpillar changes into a chrysalis and then a butterfly. Piaget theorized that we are working to make sense of the world, holding our knowledge in balance or cognitive equilibrium. Piaget, 1952-1954. As we encounter information, we create schemas in which to catalog it. A schema is a mental framework that helps us organize and interpret information we receive from our environment. For example, you might have a schema for a bird. It has feathers, a beak, and wings. It flies. It lays eggs in a nest. You might even include a pet parakeet you had as an example. Children develop and adjust schemas when they interact with their physical and social environments, experimenting and applying trial and error. Piaget explained these adjustments as the cognitive processes of assimilation and accommodation. Assimilation occurs when the information from your environment fits what you already know. Accommodation happens when you need to make changes to your knowledge because something doesn't fit your existing schema. For example, a child might see a parrot and realize it is a bird with a beak and wings that flies, assimilation, but the child will need to accommodate when seeing a penguin, which is flightless, or a flamingo, which has a different body shape. Figure 3.16. Both assimilation and accommodation occur throughout life as we adapt to our environments. Piaget theorized that the organization and coordination of schemas can lead to cognitive changes. When we go through major cognitive changes, we develop a new way of thinking and may even enter a new cognitive development stage. Stage 1. Sensory motor development. Although Piaget's theory is based not on age but on skills and ways of thinking, infants and toddlers are in Stage 1. This sensory motor development stage focuses primarily on children's early experiences of the world, when they are actively learning through their senses and gaining motor development coordination. Piaget divided Stage 1 into 6 substages representing different abilities that appear over the first 2 years of life, Table 3.9. In Substage 1, Piaget classified reflexes as schemas infants had at birth and then adapted into motor skills as they used them. As the brain develops, infants gain more control over their motor skills and can, for example, suck differently on a pacifier or bottle than on a nipple. Piaget would say the adapting to different cultural tools, objects to suck on, is a way of constructing sucking schemas. In Substage 2, infants have more motor control and start circular reaction or repeated behaviors. These first circular reactions are considered primary because they involve the infant's own body, such as infants enjoying sucking their thumbs. The infant can start to integrate skills, such as moving the head and mouth into position for feeding, and has more opportunities for building sensory and motor skills. In substage 3, through secondary circular reactions, the infant can start to coordinate motor and sensory skills with objects in the environment, such as by shaking a rattle or visually searching for a partially hidden toy. In substage 4, the infant has more schemas for different activities and more knowledge of the environment. They may enjoy picking up a light-up toy and transferring it from hand to hand while watching the color change. In essence, they are combining secondary circular reactions to form more complex behaviors. The infant can also now use knowledge and skills for goal-directed behavior. For example, an infant may pull their mother's hair a second time because they want to hear again that funny noise she made the first time. Figure 3.17. Piaget identified substage 4 as the time when infants also develop object permanence, the understanding that objects don't cease to exist when they can't be observed. For example, if you place a toy under a blanket and the baby lifts the blanket to reach for the toy, this demonstrates their understanding that the toy continues to exist even though it is hidden. In substage 5, the child is an experimenter learning about the properties of an object through tertiary circular reactions. Figure 3.17. What if they drop this toy off the high chair? What if they throw it across the room, bang it on the wall? People may talk about toddlers in this stage as little scientists. In substage 6, at the end of the sensory motor period, two major developments occur: symbolic thought and deferred imitation. First, according to Piaget, symbolic thought is the ability to mentally represent objects, people, or events that are not present. One of the major ways children demonstrate symbolic thought is by using language to describe objects or personal experiences, such as asking for "mama" when she is away at work. Second, children can imitate others after a delay in deferred imitation. For example, an infant might see their sibling eating with chopsticks at lunch, and then try to use two markers like chopsticks later when they are playing. Advances in understanding of the sensory motor stage. With improvements in our tools and technology for studying infants, we've learned that Piaget underestimated their cognitive abilities and that infants understand object permanence and other qualities of objects earlier than he theorized. Ebersbach, 2009, Woodward and Needham, 2008. For example, to observe the development of object permanence, Piaget hid an object in one place, spot A, several times while an infant was watching. After the infant demonstrated their understanding of object permanence by finding the object in spot A, the object was hidden in a new spot, spot B, again while the infant observed. Despite seeing the object placed in the new hiding place, infants typically looked for it in spot A, making what's called the A not B error, figure 3.18. Piaget interpreted this error to mean infants' understanding of object permanence is still incomplete. Through newer methods that don't require the infant to use the motor skill of reaching to find the object, researchers found that infants as young as 4 months of age can recognize aspects of object permanence. Balargian, 1987, Gopnik and Meltzoff, 2021. Meltzoff, 1988. They can also show deferred imitation at as early as 6 months of age if given opportunities to practice. Researchers still use Piaget's tasks to study infant cognition, but in different ways. For example, in Balargian and colleagues, 1989-2004, A not B task, the researcher hides an object behind one of two screens, spot A, and after a brief delay, the child is allowed to look for it, a visual search task, rather than Piaget's original reach task. After 2 consecutive looks, the infant must shift attention when the object is hidden behind the second screen, spot B. By 7.5 months, infants can pass the A not B task if the delay is under 2 seconds for reaching or 15 seconds for looking, showing how the type of task can affect the way researchers study and understand infants' abilities. Balargian, 2004, Diamond, 1985. Piaget was one of the first psychologists to develop a comprehensive theory of the way children develop. An impressive achievement when you consider that most of his ideas came from simply observing children and taking detailed notes. Even decades later, child development researchers support many of his basic ideas. His theory changed our understanding of children's development and became the foundation for subsequent theories of their cognitive development. Information processing and memory development. Although infants cannot talk, Psychologists can learn much about their information processing by observing them. What is the infant looking at? For how long? If shown the same image again, will the infant look away? If shown again later, will the infant remember it? Studying infants' looking patterns, or shifts in attention, improves our understanding of their cognitive development. Information processing theory examines the way the human brain works, including in making attention and memory possible. The development of attention. Researchers study different aspects of attention: when we attend, how long we can pay attention, when we might get distracted or disengaged, and when we are able to focus on one thing but ignore another. All these abilities start developing at a young age. One aspect of infant attention is alertness. Infants spend less than 20% of the day in an alert state, Colombo, 2001, with the bulk of their time spent in sleep or rest. Extended alertness or sustained attention occurs when we hold our attention to the stimulus or task, Colombo, 2001. Infants rapidly develop their ability to direct and sustain attention over the first year, Colombo, 2001. Caregivers' attention and external stimuli like lights and sounds can support alertness in newborns. At around 4 months of age, the beginnings of attentional control are evident as the infant gains the ability to shift focus. Colombo, 2001, Hendry et al., 2016. At around 9 months, infants show a significant increase in control and focus. Colombo, 2001, Hendry et al., 2016. The development of memory. Studying memory in infants can be quite the challenge. Try for a moment to recall your earliest memory. Do you truly remember it? Or is it a story someone in your family has told so often that you feel like you remember it? How old were you? Many of us cannot recall things from our infant and toddler years, a trait known as infantile amnesia. Memory requires a range of cognitive skills as well as brain and language development. Occhionero et al., 2023. Short-term memory is the ability to store information in our mind temporarily, while long-term memory consists of more permanent retention of information and skills. Researchers use several ways to identify the memory abilities of preverbal children. Cognitive development researcher Carolyn Rovi-Collier helped reveal just how impressive infant memory capabilities and learning can be through the mobile task. Rovi-Collier, 1999. In this task, the kick rate of a 2 to 6 month old infant in a crib is measured to establish a baseline. Then a ribbon is secured around the infant's ankle and attached to an overhead mobile. As the infant kicks, the mobile moves. Infants are then brought back to the lab after various delays, from 1 day to around 2 weeks. If their kicking response resumes, it indicates they remember the task. This study showed that even 3-month-old infants could remember how to move the mobile for up to 1 week. Giles and Rovi-Collier, 2011. As babies age, the length of time they can hold information in memory increases from less than a day at 2 months of age to 13 weeks at 18 months of age. Rovi-Collier and Giles, 2010. Sometimes we remember things more easily if given a reminder or prompt. For example, infants are often able to remember longer if given a reminder of the task or a context clue, such as using the same mobile design in the mobile task. Courage and Cowan, 2022. In other words, cues in their environment help their learning and memory. This research demonstrates that implicit memory, or memory that is not part of our consciousness, is present in infancy. Memory we consciously remember and recall, known as explicit memory, is more fragile in infancy, which helps explain why so many of our earliest memories begin later, in early childhood. Infant cognition and habituation. We can study infant cognition by observing infants, assigning them various tasks, and applying newer technologies including eye tracking equipment and EEGs, Figure 3.19. EEGs provide an ongoing assessment of the electrical activity in the brain in response to a sensory or cognitive event. Eye tracking measures what the infant is looking at, for how long, whether attention shifts, and where. Eye tracking can also measure pupil dilation, which indicates attention. Another measure of infant cognition is heart rate. When a baby is paying attention to a stimulus, their heart rate decreases. By using multiple methods, researchers can get a clearer understanding of how the infant is processing information, what they attend to, and what interests them. Observing infants' habituation, or decreased interest in and response to repeatedly presented stimuli, can also inform our understanding of infant cognition, learning, and attention. Habituation paradigms and visual preference methods measure how rates of responsiveness to a stimulus decrease as infants learn or process information across multiple exposures. In this procedure, a visual or auditory stimulus is presented. and the infant's attention to it is measured in terms of either increased looking time, eye gaze, increased sucking frequency, EEG pattern changes, or decreased heart rate. Colombo, 2001. Phelps, 2005. As infants habituate or become familiar with the stimulus, they look away from repeated presentations at faster and faster rates, suck more slowly, or have an increased heart rate. When infants habituate quickly, they are demonstrating efficient information processing. Aber, what happens if we show an infant two different objects? In the preferential looking technique, researchers note which object the infant pays attention to, giving insights into their interest and attention. If the choice is between a novel object and a familiar one, infants will typically look longer at and pay greater attention to the novel object. Colombo, 2001. Yu and Smith, 2016. When an infant gets bored and throws a favorite toy aside, they may simply be showing that learning has occurred. The amount of time it takes infants to process new stimuli is related to later intelligence. Several studies have associated faster habituation with improved performance on intelligence assessments, including reasoning and verbal abilities in early childhood and elementary school. Bornstein and Sigmund, 1986. Fagan et al., 2007. Polly et al., 2024. Sigmund et al., 1991. Observing infant habituation can also give healthcare providers, researchers, and caregivers insights into an infant's speed of processing various sensory information: sight, sound, touch, their learning and memory, and their overall cognitive development. Sicard-Krat et al., 2022. For example, a child who shows slower habituation to visual stimuli, being shown a toy, in comparison to tactile stimuli, holding the toy, may need to have their visual acuity checked. Sociocultural theory of cognitive development. Lev Vygotsky, 1896 to 1934, who developed his theory around the same time as Jean Piaget, was particularly interested in the role of the social environment and culture in cognitive development and learning. In his sociocultural theory, Vygotsky proposed that children learn about the world and develop cognitively from their interactions with caregivers, other adults, peers, and the culture at large. Vygotsky, 1978. Cultural tools play an important role too, and include language, systems of counting, memory techniques, art, writing, maps. Vygotsky, 1998. And, more recently, computers, cell phones, and other modern technology. Like Piaget, Vygotsky assumed children construct their own knowledge, but he made a stronger claim that the cultural and social environments were an inseparable part of learning. For a child to construct their knowledge and learn, Vygotsky believed they must be nurtured or guided by more knowledgeable people like adults, older children, or peers, and they must be aware that what they're learning is important. As you recall from 1.3 Major Theories and Theorists, he called this process scaffolding, and used the concept of the zone of proximal development to describe how scaffolding can advance cognitive growth in children. During scaffolding, the child's cognitive partner uses language for scaffolding, social speech. Over time, children will begin using their own language as the basis for their cognitive development. They will talk to themselves as they work through a challenge, in what we call private or egocentric speech, aloud at first but then silently. For example, a child learning to put together a puzzle may mutter, "First, find the corner and edge pieces." But, as their puzzle experience grows, they may simply mentally remind themselves of that step. In short, they have internalized the skills acquired through scaffolding and can now independently demonstrate a new skill or knowledge. Language isn't the only means of guiding young children's learning, since children also learn by observing others and copying their behaviors. The learning process may also include social referencing, the use of information from others to determine how to respond to a situation. Ellie et al., 2020. For example, an infant may use an adult's facial expression, such as a stern look, as a social reference before climbing over the baby gate, or not. A caregiver can also guide an infant's learning indirectly by placing toys nearby for the child to explore. If the infant seems unsure, the parent can use facial expressions and tone to show their feelings about the toy. Variations in cognitive development. Recall the reliance on weird, white, educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic samples for much of the research on child development. The theories of cognitive development you've just studied were developed by studying middle-class children in weird cultures. However, the cognitive development of young children is influenced by many variables, including environmental and cultural influences, culture. Even before birth, we are immersed in culturally shaped environments. Families and others in the home frame our exposure to language, values, and norms, and transmit culture through daily interactions. Family traditions, values and expectations, religious practices, holidays and celebrations, and exposure to education and the media bring specific knowledge and experiences to the child. For example, adults in the non-Western indigenous community of Vanuatu emphasize physical contact with infants more than visual, face-to-face contact, which is emphasized in Western cultures such as the United States. Little et al., 2016.4. In rural Africa, Kipsigi mothers carry their infants on their backs most of the day. Super and Harkness, 2002. This close body contact gives infants time to observe what their parents are doing, influencing their cognitive and emotional development. Banovsky, 2023. Socioeconomic influences. Family socioeconomic status, SES, can also play a role in early cognitive development. Together, factors like caregiver education and family access to resources have consistently been found to influence cognitive development, including language, memory, and executive functions. Blair and Raver, 2016. Farah et al., 2006. Weissleder and Fernald, 2013. Children from families of low SES consistently score lower than others on measures of cognitive ability and academic achievement. Lurie et al., 2021. Their families often have less access to educational resources, and poverty has been shown to harm the developing brain by increasing stress and reducing opportunities. Blair and Raver, 2016. Tarullo et al., 2020. But the way in which SES influences cognitive development is complicated. Socioeconomic status is associated with access to books, exposure to environmental hazards, language exposure, the quality of parent-infant interactions, and parental warmth and sensitivity. Mothers with higher SES are more likely to have healthier lifestyle habits during pregnancy, smoke less, and exhibit less sedentary behavior. Larinaga et al., 2013. Parents with lower SES may be less confident in their parenting skills. Liu et al., 2020. The level of maternal education, an important component of SES, is one of the strongest predictors of child development. Pace et al., 2017. Likely because it is strongly associated with other resources that affect child development, such as financial security, family structure, and maternal depression. Jackson et al., 2017. What can we do to protect children and families with lower SES? We know high-quality early childhood care and education can provide many benefits. Davis and Dunn, 2022. Interventions that support parents and give them strategies for interacting with their infants at home can also be helpful. Company Cordoba et al., 2021. Home environment. Home is where young children typically spend most of their time. Aspects of the home environment include parent-child interaction and support, caregivers' promotion of autonomy, respect for the child, use of rules, and overall home environment quality. Bradley and Caldwell, 1982. A study of Malaysian infants aged 12 to 13 months showed that infants in a low-quality home environment scored lower on cognitive tests than their peers, with higher quality home environments. Nerliana et al., 2020. Quality of home environment has been related to cognitive development after 1 year, through the preschool years, and in later intellectual development. Totsika and Silva, 2004. In fact, the home environment has been found to be a greater influence on neurodevelopment at 18 months than SES and maternal IQ. Ranfani et al., 2015. Ultimately, the quality of infants' experiences within the home can indicate whether any interventions should be targeted to individual families. 6-month-old Ibrahim has just woken from his nap, and his father Ahmed hears him babbling da-da-da-da over the intercom. At first, Ahmed is excited because it sounds like the baby is calling him. However, as he listens, he begins to wonder whether this is just another example of the babbling he first heard last week, when Ibrahim was saying, ba-ba-ba. As he lifts his son out of his crib, Ahmed expresses his delight in seeing Ibrahim and begins to have a conversation with him in a higher than normal pitch. He narrates everything he is doing while changing his son's diaper, and Ibrahim smiles as he talks and resumes babbling when he pauses. Father and son are both fully enjoying their conversation. Babbling and turn-taking are just a couple of the important milestones in the development of language that Ibrahim will be achieving during his first 2 years of life. Language development is a complex process influenced by both nature and nurture. As infants progress through their first year of life, they develop the components of language at a remarkable pace. laying the foundation for building more complex language abilities in the years to come. Language and communication. Although language and communication are part of our daily life, when asked what is language, you might struggle to answer. A communication system that uses words and rules to allow the transmission of information between individuals is language. Language can be spoken, written, or signed to communicate ideas to others, called productive language, or to comprehend ideas from others, called receptive language. We can also communicate without language, such as through gestures, facial expressions, body language, and sound. Language differs from these means, however, in having a set of systematic rules, such as grammar and spelling, and having infinite generativity, the capacity to create an unlimited number of meaningful messages. For example, if you were given the sentence, "Lifespan development is useful in your life," you could convey that same message an infinite number of ways, such as by saying, "This class has so many life hacks," or "Lifespan comes with a lot of useful tips." Features of language. The main features of language include phonemes, morphemes, syntax, grammar, semantics, and pragmatics. Children and all people use all these features to communicate with others and learn language. You'll learn about syntax, grammar, semantics, and pragmatics, which emerge in early childhood, in 5.4 Language in Early Childhood. For now, consider some of the smallest parts of language, phonemes and morphemes. A phoneme is the smallest unit of sound within a language. The sounds of the alphabet are phonemes, as are letter combinations that make a single sound like sh, ir, and u. For example, in the word cats, the phonemes are /she, sasha, sasha, sashay, or /s, sasha, sesh. All languages have phonemes, but in different numbers. English has about 44. Phonemes alone typically don't convey any meaning, but once children learn phoneme sounds, they can combine them to create and comprehend meaning. Another feature of language is a morpheme, the smallest meaningful units of language. Morphemes can be individual words, roots, prefixes, or suffixes. For example, mama, dogs, homework, and you are morphemes. Some words contain more than one morpheme. Dogs contains 2, dog and s. Prefixes and suffixes like re and ed also serve as morphemes because they convey meaning. For example, the word redesigned consists of 3 morphemes: the root word design, the prefix re, which means to do again, and the suffix ed, meaning the action occurred in the past. Contextual cues like tone of voice, body movements, and word emphasis also carry meaning and aid communication in all languages. For example, a toddler saying "da-da" while crying as the father is leaving the room is expressing a different meaning than when saying "da-da" and smiling when the father returns. We can also be more confident an infant understands phonemes when they look at "da-da" and smile, as opposed to just making the sound "da-da" by accident in a string of other sounds. Language and communication milestones. Infants and toddlers typically progress through several milestones in communication and language development, beginning with crying, cooing, babbling, and gestures, before transitioning into using single words, 2-word phrases, and finally, full patterned speech. Crying and cooing. Newborns come equipped with their very first communication tool, crying. Crying allows infants to signal distress, Vermeulen et al. 2022. And some research indicates their cries have different sounds and features that can help caregivers identify the type of distress and what the baby needs, G et al. 2021. For example, one cry might indicate the baby needs to burp to relieve pain, while another may indicate tiredness and a need for sleep. During interactions and daily experiences, infants are also taking in sounds, rhythms, and language cues. By 2 months of age, they are making facial expressions and smiling during social exchanges, and they also start cooing, the deliberate generation of vowel sounds, such as oo, ah, and gurgling sounds that serve as practice vocalization. An infant may coo to entertain themselves or to respond to others. The infant coos, the caregiver responds verbally, the infant coos in response. This interaction is an early lesson in the art of turn-taking in conversation and most often occurs with a caregiver, babbling. Beginning around 4 to 6 months of age, with more experience and improving motor and brain development, infants begin to repeat consonant-vowel sounds like na and ba, called babbling. Typical consonant sounds in early babbling include per gram, /k per, per meter, /enbar, /peepor, /beepor, and by debor. These are fairly universal, no matter what language is spoken around the infant. However, infants quickly become more sensitive to what they are hearing and begin to use the phonemes in the languages to which they are regularly exposed. Plummer and Beckman, 2015. Some sounds they were making will disappear if they don't hear them consistently. Although caregivers often mistake early babbling for first words, baba does not necessarily mean bottle at this stage. The infant has not yet tied their vocalizations to any meaning, and babbling can be just experimental sound making. Babbling can happen without sound too. Children who are deaf and those exposed to sign language may also babble by making hand movements to represent language. Laying and Bergelson, 2020. Lillo Martin and Henner, 2021. Infants who babble more around 6 months also tend to have more productive language at 12 months. Wehrwach et al., 2021. Gesturing. As early as 7 months of age, infants may begin gesturing with hands and body to communicate, such as by shaking the head for no and waving the hands for goodbye. Figure 3.20. Crace et al., 2004. Because gesturing may be easier than saying words, caregivers can teach some simple gestures to enhance communication. Some even use this time as an opportunity to teach hearing children some sign language, such as the American Sign Language signs for milk or food. At around age 9 months to a year, infants use their own gaze or a pointing gesture during interactions with adults to focus others on items around them. Baldwin, 2014. When adults respond by labeling or discussing the objects, receptive and productive language development are improved, and vocabulary development is enhanced. For example, an infant may point to a novel object and look at their caregiver quizzically. The caregiver's response of naming the object, such as, "That's a flower," can further support the infant's growing language awareness and address their curiosity. Should caregivers use baby signing with infants? A growing trend among caregivers is to use baby sign language to help infants communicate their needs before they can vocalize words. Baby sign language is a simplified form of American Sign Language with only a small subset of signs and no grammar rules. Babies start attending to signs as early as 4 months of age, Novak et al., 2022, and by 6 to 8 months can learn to ask for basic needs such as milk or a diaper change. The practice can be a fun way to engage with infants, who may be less fussy if they can communicate basic needs, but research does not indicate it will enhance language and cognitive development. Kirk et al., 2013. Some in the deaf and hard of hearing community have also expressed concern about hearing individuals using and modifying language intended for their community. Baby signing is not language because it is missing the syntax, morphology, and pragmatics that make American Sign Language a full language. De Mulder, 2019. With that understanding, however, teaching babies a few signs in the first year of life may improve their ability to communicate and help parents respond to their needs. Kirk et al., 2013. First words and holophrases. Words are linguistic symbols that refer to an object, event, descriptor, or action, and learning what they mean is part of our language development. In terms of receptive language, infants can comprehend many more words than they can speak. They can recognize names of many common objects as early as 6 months. Bergelson and Swingley, 2012. One estimate is that children can produce 30 to 90 words around 18 months of age, but understand so many that it is difficult, if not impossible, to measure the number. Vekavori et al., 2021. Some children say their first word as early as 9 months of age, but around 12 months is typical. The first word of a child who speaks English is often a noun, like cup, ball, mama, dada, dog, cat, or the name of another person or object the child regularly interacts with. Clerkin and Smith, 2022, Nelson, 1974. In a verb-friendly language, such as Chinese or Korean, children may learn more verbs and be taught to notice actions and relationships between objects. Yi, 2020. When babies use one word to convey a complete thought, that word is called a holophrase. For example, no might really mean, I don't want that right now, and ball might mean, where is the ball, or give me the ball. The caregiver can rely on other communication cues to pick up the meaning of these holophrases. Young children learning words make a common error called overextension, the use of a learned word to inappropriately name something else. This often happens when a child doesn't have another word to use. For example, a child might call a tiger a kitty. Young children may also exhibit underextension, the inappropriate restriction of a word. For example, a child might call a pet cat kitty, but not refer to any other cats as kitty. Toddlers are still learning how to produce and coordinate the complex movements needed in speech, and the necessary muscles and nerves are still developing. In fact, many children don't acquire all the English consonant sounds until 5 or 6 years of age. Crow and McLeod 2020. Thus, they also make pronunciation errors. For example, they may mistakenly interchange sounds like B as of A, D as of A, or C as of A, D as of A, or C as of A, D as of A. Shahid et al. 2021. They also tend to simplify words. Shafitri 2021. For example, they may say wabbit instead of rabbit, or nana instead of banana, opting for sounds that are easier for them to articulate. They may omit consonant sounds at the beginning or end of words, or reverse sounds, such as by saying pasgetti for spaghetti. These errors are a normal part of the language development process, and most children outgrow them with practice. Severe or persistent errors may be a sign of a speech or language disorder, however, and should be evaluated by a speech-language pathologist. Preston et al. 2013. Telegraphic speech. By 18 to 24 months of age, children are starting to combine words into short sentences. Shortened word utterances that convey meaning but do not rely on grammar rules are called telegraphic speech. For example, a child might say more cookie to indicate that they want more cookies, or go Papa house to indicate they would like to go to Grandpa's house. Telegraphic speech doesn't rely on grammar and often eliminates little words like and the. The name was coined in the 1960s because this speech is similar to telegraph messages. Had it been identified today, it might be called text talk. Vocabulary expansion. Around 16 to 24 months of age, children experience a vocabulary growth spurt and start learning new words at an accelerated rate. By about 2 years old, a toddler uses between 50 and 200 words. By 3 years old, they have a vocabulary of up to 1,000 words and can speak in sentences. Children go through what some call a naming explosion, in which they learn several new words a week, showing impressive progress in receptive and productive language development. They learn new words by quickly connecting those they encounter and their meanings, a process often called fast mapping. Jackson et al. 2019, Landau et al. 1988, Markman and Wachtel 1988. Table 3.10 summarizes the language milestones that occur over the first 2 years of life. Major theories of language development. How do very young children learn to communicate and use language? This section reviews some of the major theories of language acquisition: nativist, learning, and interactionist approaches. The nativist approach takes a biological perspective, asserting that humans are born with the innate ability to learn language, and that experience plays a very limited role. Noam Chomsky, 1968, hypothesized a language acquisition device, LAD, that is uniquely human and predisposes us to learn language. This view asserts that our brains allow us to analyze language, to learn its rules quickly and efficiently. Neurodevelopmental research has found that the brain is indeed wired for language at birth. In experiments that played different sounds to newborns, the left hemisphere of the brain was found to be more active in response to native language sounds, while the right responds more to non-native language sounds. Van Lezing et al. 2016. What Chomsky called a LAD may actually be Broca's and Wernicke's areas in the brain's left hemisphere. Broca's area is specialized for language production, and Wernicke's area for language comprehension. Figure 3.21. The brain clearly is critical for the development of language, but it does not tell the whole story. Other early language theories claimed learning and experience are critical, and that language is learned through social interactions. Thus, the learning approach to language development highlights the contribution of caregivers. One influential learning theorist, B.F. Skinner, 1957, believed we learn language through operant conditioning. That is, as infants begin making random sounds, parents respond with interest, attention, and excitement that reinforce the infant's vocalizations. For example, if a child says mama, a mother may smile and repeat the word back, encouraging the infant to repeat the sounds. Similarly, other learning theorists believed infants learn language by observing and imitating the language use of others. Bandura, 1989. Although evidence shows caregivers are indeed critical for language development, learning theories alone cannot explain language development. According to the interactionist approach, language development occurs as the result of complex interactions between the biological readiness of children and the environment in which they are raised. and language exists primarily for the purpose of communication during social interactions. In newer approaches to language theory, researchers recognize that humans have biological resources that facilitate language learning, and that language is supported by environmental influences, including enriching social interactions. Bruner, 1983, Tomasello, 2003. Support for the role of social interactions comes from research demonstrating that toddlers learn vocabulary better from face-to-face social interactions than from videos. Troseth et al., 2018. When language is presented on a screen, infants learn better in the presence of other infants. Lytle et al., 2018. It is more difficult for infants to fully experience the social cues needed to attract and keep their attention on a screen, and research has shown that screen time is associated with difficulties in learning social skills and reading emotions. We also know that when infants spend more time watching media, they spend less time talking and interacting with their caregivers, which can slow later vocabulary growth. Bruch et al., 2024. Kucker et al., 2024. Influences on language development. Regardless of the theory of language development, a variety of biological and environmental factors influence language development. These include universal listening, caregiver influence, and different styles of toddler expressiveness. Despite significant differences in parenting styles, living situations, and degrees of socialization, infants in different cultures achieve language development milestones at about the same ages, suggesting biological influences on language development. Research on language and sound perception found that infants may begin as universal listener, able to hear and distinguish the unique sounds within their native language as well as in non-native languages. However, by 10 to 12 months of age, the ability to distinguish sounds outside their own language diminishes as their brains become specialized to respond to the sounds that are part of their native language. Ortiz-Mentia et al., 2019. Worker and Tees, 1984. This loss of universal listening is also reflected in changes in their babbling patterns as they focus on producing sounds in the languages they are learning. Maniva and Genesee, 2002. Morgan and Wren, 2018. A strong link also exists between caregivers and language development. When many adults and even older children interact with infants and toddlers, their speech naturally changes in a way that attracts and keeps an infant's attention. Such child-directed speech is distinguished by sing-song rhythm and higher pitch, more repetition, and the use of simple words. Farron et al., 2016. It also employs exaggerated vowel and consonant sounds and more facial expressions. Words are highly articulated and larger pauses are made between words, so the child can hear the individual sounds. Infants attend to and listen longer to child-directed speech than to normal speech. Worker et al., 1994, and prefer it over adult-directed speech, even as newborns. Cooper et al., 1997. Many Babies Consortium, 2020. Children who hear child-directed speech learn words more rapidly than children who do not. She et al., 2022. Children whose caregivers are more responsive to their vocalizations also tend to have larger vocabularies. Madigan et al., 2019. Valaton et al., 2017. Parents can also help young children develop an understanding of grammar rules by modeling correct grammar in response to grammatical errors by the child. Two ways to do this are recasting and expansion. Cleve et al., 2015. For example, if a child says, her want toy, the adult may recast the statement as a question with correct grammar. Does she want your toy? In expansion, the adult keeps the basic structure of the child's words and corrects semantic issues. The child might say, him is silly, and the adult responds with, he is silly. This manner of modeling correct grammar for young children is associated with the development of better expressive language, helping infants learn language and communicate. Caregivers play a critical role in language development for their infants. Here are some tips for maximizing the development of language. Take turns. When an infant coos at you, make the sound in return. Pause to allow them to respond. Make some noise. Interact with infants by talking about what you are doing, reading to them, or naming objects you are both looking at. Pay attention. If an infant or toddler points or gestures to something, teach them the word by saying or signing the name of the object. Exchange gestures. Encourage hellos and goodbyes, and give praise when toddler tries to speak with others. Consider using signs. If an infant wants to communicate their needs but cannot make the sounds of language, you can say a word and or sign the word, such as food or sleep, to help them communicate what they feel, like hunger or fatigue. Researchers have also identified two styles of toddler language. When using a referential style, toddlers more frequently talk about objects and things, while the expressive style, often used for social reasons, expresses feelings and needs. Children who use a referential style when talking like to have adults label objects in their environment or in books, whereas children who use an expressive style are interested in using language to communicate or just to be social. Some research has shown stronger patterns of referential speech among U.S. children whose mothers label objects when conversing with them, and more use of the expressive style for children with Korean mothers who emphasize actions and social routines when conversing with their child. Sung and Shu, 2009. Expressive communication is useful in the context of social interactions, as when infants are encouraged to greet others by waving. This style of communication directs the child's attention toward other individuals rather than toward things. Ashtari et al., 2020. Variations in language development. Language development may sometimes follow a different pathway than described, due to developmental or environmental differences. These include the influence of impoverished environments, intervention and prevention with at-risk children, and bilingual and multilingual environments. The quality of the environment influences language learning. For example, at the end of the 20th century, many children in Romania were separated from their families and raised in impoverished orphanages where they experienced substantial neglect. These children showed significant language delays along with delays in cognition and motor development and deficits in socio-emotional behaviors. Many could not produce intelligible words at 2.5 years old. Windsor et al., 2007. When Romanian dictator Nicolae Ceausescu was overthrown and the plight of the children was discovered, many were moved into foster care as part of a large study on the impact of neglect on child development. Given careful and evidence-based intervention, they showed significant improvement in their language and other areas of development. Nelson et al., 2009. While stress and adversity are known to increase risks in child development, resilience can be promoted in language and overall development through early intervention and prevention, such as in individualized care and foster care. Humphreys et al., 2022. Intervention and prevention strategies can also promote language development by improving parent-child reading strategies. For example, some research indicates that children from a low SES background are exposed to less reading time and fewer interactive reading strategies. Barnes and Puccioni, 2017, Hoff, 2013. Parents can be taught the skills and knowledge needed to read effectively with their children, however, and increasing their motivation to do so improves their children's later academic achievement in school. Paeto et al., 2022. Effective interventions include such parent education and outreach by support agencies, as well as community-based programs like reading buddies, story hours at libraries, and access to books through organizations like Dolly Parton's Imagination Library. Multilingualism is common in many parts of the world and is on the rise in the United States. Parents often have questions about the advantages or disadvantages of raising multilingual children. Over time, children learning more than one language from birth become proficient in each and achieve language milestones around the same time as young children learning only one language. Alboreda Castellot et al., 2011, Fessman et al., 2017. When learning a second or third language after becoming fluent in the first, children often need more time to reach proficiency in the additional languages. Baker, 2011. Children sometimes combine elements of different languages, such as English and Spanish, when communicating. Although it may seem they are confused, research shows that bilingual infants are able to discriminate between their two languages. Byers-Heinlein and Lou Williams, 2013. Since children are born ready to learn languages, caregivers should feel comfortable exposing children to more than one language.